The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
And hello, everybody. My name is Jason Murphy. We will begin in the next 5 minutes, just waiting for people to join up. Thank you. And before we begin, we do have some attendees in. We're just going to kind of wait another minute or two. Obviously, it's 2 minutes to the hour. I'm just waiting for people to join up. But for those who are on the line, can you please let me know you can hear me okay and that you can see my screen? And now that we are at the top of the hour, we're just going to wait 1 more minute, maybe 2 more minutes at the very most, just to let people join up. I do appreciate you taking in the time out of your busy days and to come sit with me for 30 to 45 minutes to talk about patch management and AV. We'll be right there. Now it is 1 minute after the hour, so this would be a good time to begin. So just to start with a little bit of housekeeping, this is our master class part 4. We've done 3 other parts. This is going to be one of my favorites. So I'm as an IT person, I'm very passionate about patch management and AV. So I hope I convey a lot of that enthusiasm today around this masterclass part 4 on patch management and anti-malware. So before we begin, I'll kind of introduce myself here in a moment. If you have any questions, I really want to make this as interactive as possible. Feel free to use the chat method, raise your hand, swing your arms. No, I'm just kidding. I won't be able to see that. But use the chat method, ask any questions, and then as I go through, I'll try to pop it open and answer the questions as I go through, or at least at the very end, I'll have a bunch of questions. So without further ado, let's begin. And again, hopefully everybody can see my screen and hear me okay. Paul was on the line and he let me know he could hear me earlier. I'm seeing my mic, so I am unmuted. Which I am famous for. I do mute my line and forget about it. So hopefully everything's working here well. So let's begin. So without further ado, who am I? My name is Jason Murphy. I'm the Senior Sales Engineer, Director of Sales Engineering here at CareWorx IT. I am involved in many things within CareWorx, but primarily I work on our Managed Services Division, or CareWorx IT division, specifically on patch policies, patch management, patching of systems, whether it be Windows, Mac, Linux, scripted methods. But patch is very near and dear to what I do at CareWorx, but also AV, right? So, and we use various flavors of AV with some of our customers, but there's one particular standard that we like to use internally. So just a little bit about CareWorx before we kind of get into the masterclass is that based on our size, and we are a top 40 global managed service provider, we are managing roughly 60,000 plus devices. Those are across about 4,400 sites across North America and some in Europe. Which generate roughly around 500,000 service tickets annually. That's either from systems, monitoring, or from end users. And then we also have 1,500 customers that we support in those geos. And that uptake is roughly around 1 million end users that we look after. And part of our DNA here at CareWorx is really about end user experience. So it's one of those things that when I talk about AV and patch management, I always kind of have that in mind. What's going to create a seamless or easy experience for ourselves in IT or for those in business, but also for the employees who we have to patch and keep protected. A little bit about us. Here at CareWorx, we do what is called managed ITSM. So we work with mid-market companies, small enterprise, even larger small businesses that have needs where there's internal IT department around, managing IT service management, right? An IT service management solution here at CareWorx comes in the form of a particular technology called ServiceNow. We also have a 24/7 service desk. So we're able to service the needs of our customers and your customers in a 24/7 method. And again, that is what we call a boutique service desk offering, or what we call a white glove service desk offering. And that is based in PEI, Canada. What else do we do here? Now, this is where I come in. This is where the fun stuff, I believe, starts off. This is where we get into monitoring, automation, and security. Some of my most favorite things. I'm kind of involved in kind of all aspects of our business, but I like to play in this one probably the most, only because I've been monitoring for probably 15 years or so. I've been creating automated solutions along that time. And then we don't really need to speak about security in 2018. Obviously, it is a focus across any business, regardless big or small. And remote systems administration, which ties directly into our managed ITSM, where standing up an IT service management solution comes with a lot of heavy lifting. So we also take that on for our customers. Now, that being said, let's get to the gravy here. Okay, so when we talk about patch management, one of the things I try to convey to any customer, and prior to CareWorx, I used to work for a global vendor, here in Ottawa, called SolarWinds. And SolarWinds had a patch technology, and I would convey that to other MSPs on how important it is to manage patch for your customers. Now, as somebody who has patched systems from Windows NT to Windows XP, along the years, the focus, back in those days, if I didn't patch a computer for a month, everything was still probably fine. In 2018, we can no longer take that approach. So I really want to kind of go through these 4 bulleted items and really kind of convey to you why it's important. Okay, patch management is one of the most important IT tasks in any organization, because leaving software and operating systems unpatched puts your organization at risk of serious security breaches. There is one thing I did leave off here, as we're patching software, those installed programs, and also those operating systems. There is one other layer that we should be patching as well, and that is the hardware layer. Things like firmware upgrades for those disks for that BIOS or CMOS. Manually monitoring applying these security updates is not only difficult, but sometimes dangerous. If we've ever installed a patch that has broken an application, and it's happened, it does happen even today. In fact, it probably happens more than it did 10 years ago. Even a slight delay in installing those security updates could put your systems in a vulnerable position. And you have to think of things like Windows. You have to also think about things like Adobe and Java. If you're running any Linux kernels, you have to think about Apache. It's one of those things where a lot of the times we're running web servers in Linux, so there's often vulnerabilities there as well. You have to feel comfortable enough and confident enough to bet on yourself in a race against today's cyber criminal. It's one of those things where, and I'll get into cyber criminals and kind of the verticals that outline that. However, they are using some very, very, very sophisticated tool sets, and they know exactly what they're doing. And I'll talk more about kind of the cyber criminal landscape as we proceed. Our patching software provides automated patch management, which frees your IT administrators from the routine of work of manually patching computers. So I use a patch management system, right? And it allows me to protect all of my customers, those 1,500, right? So I'm able to patch them, keep them up to date. And again, I work with them on what that reporting looks like, so they know, they have peace of mind that if they are focused on other things, then I've got the patching down for them. Patching software provides automated patch management, which frees your IT administrators from the routine work of manually patching, right? So having a patching system, whether it be mine or whether it be any other patching system, there are great ones out there that can automate patch management for you. And I use what is called a hybrid method. Some things I'll patch automatically, some things I'll patch manually. For example, a Windows upgrade, that's not something I'm going to push out on Patch Tuesday. Right? And if you're familiar with Microsoft Windows patching, on the second Tuesday of the month, that is when Microsoft releases their breadth of patches, right? Now, I keep using the term patch, right? Obviously, we all know, Windows probably gets the most glory for patching, only because, it's the most widely adopted system out there, at least currently. Now, let's talk about what a patch is, right? We've talked about patch management. What is really a patch? A patch is a piece of code that can be applied to a software program after it's been installed. So once a program or operating system has been installed in your computer, it needs patches. Patches are created in order to correct issues with that program that are discovered after it's been released. Okay, and you can think of it like a bandage, which is obviously the little bandage on Windows here, or the fix for the program or the system. So it follows that patch management is the systematic and documented management of patches. But we want to be thorough, so let's clearly define the practice, right? And I take a very methodical approach to how I do that hybrid patch management. Some, criticals and security updates I will patch immediately, but I do set delays, right? When Microsoft releases patches at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm not automatically trying to install those patches. There are certain things that I do to ensure that there's going to be success in those critical security programs, right? So what I do is I use what is called a Canary System. So I have a set of dev machines that I'm able to patch, making sure that, if I'm clicking through, there's no errors, and it's done the critical and security updates based on, anything from Windows 2008, 2008 R2 to 2016 server. Pardon me. And the other one is everything from, Windows Vista to, Windows 10, based on all those different builds of Windows 10. Now, let's talk about threat actors. This is where the cyber criminal comes in. Now, the cyber criminal is really just one of these 5, subsets of cyber criminals. The first and foremost, and I'll read the rest at the top in a moment, but we talk about organized crime, right? Now, you can't really think of organized crime like we used to. It used to be the biker gangs, or it used to be the mafia, or, people who would, extort money from, businesses and those kinds of things. It's evolved outside of that. We have some very sophisticated people out there, and this is an evolving adversary, right? Organized crime is becoming, widely adopted all across the world, okay? So what we're seeing is the risk in chip and pin, which is really kind of a way for them to generate revenue, right? Ransomware, for example. Okay, nation states. Okay, so when we're talking about nation states, there is political gain to being able to get information from various companies, various individuals, right? So they're becoming more targeted, and we all hear about cyber criminals in the news in terms of lulsec or anonymous, or there's tons and tons of these groups out there. They're more of what we call the hacktivists. But this is where nation states will actually have governments that are actively, South Korea, for example, or Russia, many, many more, Iran, for example. They're all out there to kind of infiltrate. Okay. Now, the third one here, cyber terrorists. And this is probably the most scariest piece of all of this. And I was listening, or I should say I was reading, I was actually listening to a webinar as well, but I was reading a particular article from basically the security CISO at Symantec. And they conveyed, and that's exactly where this data came from, by the way, it came from Symantec, is that cyber terrorists will cause a global pandemic at some point in our life. And that's something that what we really need to, as security practitioners, IT people, business owners, we all have kind of the fiduciary responsibility to make sure that we're able to prevent, bad things from happening, right? It's a matter of time. So they did use a targeted date of 5 years. So within a 5-year period, we're probably going to see our first major cyber terrorism event. I don't know if you keep your ear to the ground in security circles, but more and more often, energy grids, nuclear power plants are being targeted. And it's unfortunate because now we have to rely on our governments to protect those critical assets, right? And I hope they really obviously do a good job. And when I start talking about AV and machine learning and AI, hopefully it'll kind of circle back here in just a little bit. Insiders. Those are the people on the inside, right? Now, I have actually seen this happen. There are people who get employed. They have access to important data, and then that data also makes its way to the media or to another company, right? So we see insiders all of the time, and they are one of our weakest links. And again, that's human nature, right? Money talks, and unfortunately, sometimes that data can go elsewhere. So making sure that we're using policies like AV and patch management to really shore down who can leave software behind to give them full access. And hacktivists. This is the one we probably read the most about in the media. This is the one that causes the most drama, right? So, they're very unpredictable, difficult to defend against. They're on the dark web. They're out doing things to hit police departments, for example, or I won't get into all of it, but sometimes we refer to them as the white knights of the internet. They're out there doing things to really make a name and do things what they would, at least in their own minds and hearts, to do things, something nice and something right. However, it's still illegal. So, as you can see across the top, 58% of threats targeted small businesses. So, hey, maybe you're a small business owner, or either you're the IT person in a small business. 58% of threats target small business. 50% of breaches carried out by organized criminal groups. So things like ransomware, right? 76, and all of this data comes directly from Symantec. I'm not making up these numbers. 76% of breaches were financially motivated. Obviously, if you look at the other 24%, there's other reasons like hacktivism and everything, insiders and everything else, but most of this stuff is happening because people want money. 140 targeted attack groups use spear phishing, utilized by 71% of them. So spear phishing tactics are number one, right? So what are you doing for spear phishing attempts, or CEO fraud, or CFO fraud? People who get emails who look legitimate, has all the marketing, all the right imaging, you click on the link, and next thing you know, you're doing a wire transfer. Okay, so it's one of those things where we really need to think about protecting our organization on many fronts. And I'm going to get into layered security. Now, that was not my previous webinar, but it was my masterclass number 2 about layered security. So you have to understand that attack vertical, right? And that is based on the Lockheed Martin layered security approach. So I'll be showing that very, very quickly, and we'll kind of go through a bit of it, because patching and AV is a part of this strategy, right? Again, how do we protect ourselves and our customers in this new world, right? So, and when I use customers, it's you're my customer, or you're looking after IT and patch, for example. So, if you're not, who is? If you don't have an answer to that, you need to find one. Okay, you need to understand and manage cyber risk as you understand and manage business risk. The same thing, right? Exact same thing. We have to be able to discuss it intelligently and understand what is the risk to the business. Now, I'm going to show you a slide here in a little bit that really talks about security versus risk, because I can talk security all day long. I love talking security. I'm what you call a propeller head. So I love talking about this stuff. But reality dictates that when I want to talk to my GM, my CEO, about security, I don't talk about security. I talk about the risk. What is the risk to the business? Okay. Now, we've all seen this pop up, or we've seen this little snippet that I did here in Windows, right? And it's happened to all of us, right? We install a brand new computer, we put it on the domain, we're going to patch it eventually. This computer now becomes your weakest link, right? There are roughly 117 important updates available. And now that's 117 different attack verticals just for one computer and in your organization, right? You're only as good as your least patched system, right? You can patch, you've got those 20, 40 machines, they're all brand new, they get patched, but you've got that Windows XP machine, right? Well, guess where they're going through? Now, when I look at patch, and Microsoft has its own classification of patch, and I'm going to talk about Microsoft classification because it's all pretty straightforward. If you've ever done patching before, even if you haven't, Microsoft really kind of dictates around what are called KBs. Behind each Microsoft vulnerability or enhancement or patch, they'll write a KB and kind of outline what it's doing to fix the problem. I also use a U.S. government agency called the National Vulnerability Database, NVD, and it's a kind of what I would call a global standard. It's based in the U.S., but it's a global standard that I use to really understand what is going on in the threat landscape, day to day, month to month, right? So based on the database, they will present me with what are called CVEs. What is a CVE? A CVE stands for Common Vulnerability Enumeration, which is a really kind of fancy word. I still call it CVE, but it's a dictionary or a code for the particular exploit, right? So, for example, if you've ever heard of something like Apache Struts, it will get a CVE. And then as I go through, you'll understand how to really understand that CVE. Okay, so it's a dictionary of publicly known information, security vulnerabilities, and exposures. In NVD, the National Vulnerability Database, each published information security vulnerability is given a CVE identifier, and it usually goes CVE 2018, XYZ. Okay, where Y stands for the year and the vulnerability was discovered, and then it gives it a 4-digit code so we can identify it. Right? You can use the NVD search engine to search for CVE vulnerabilities at the NVD vulnerability search, which I provided the link. And I highly recommend that you head over to nvd.nist.gov/vuln/search. And from there, you can really go through month to month to see what vulnerabilities are out there, right? You'll see things on Adobe, on Java, Microsoft Windows. But there's probably 150 other applications that are part of this as well. So what is a CVSS? And this is how I really determine the criticality of certain patches. Now, I do run Linux operating systems as well. So when I hear about an Apache Struts vulnerability, it's one of those things. The first thing I look for is a common vulnerability scoring system, which is really just a CVSS. It provides a score, right? It will give me a rating of 10 or a rating of 3. I can tell based on that scoring system the severity of that particular exploit or vulnerability. Is it in the wild? Is it actively being utilized by these threat actors, right? So there's assignment of a CVS score based on the following criteria: the primary impact on the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of the protected system or resource, right? Are we looking at Spectre, for example, which is a very complicated method to look at data in memory. You have to be fairly sophisticated to be able to exact that, right? But it's a hardware vulnerability. So we're now at the mercy of hardware vendors to either patch their systems or create new hardware that do not have these vulnerabilities. Okay? The derivative impact on loss of life and or property, right? The percentage of the impact, again, if there's a vulnerability in Windows and it allows someone to do a remote exploit, then that criticality tends to go up and up and up. You'll start seeing them at the 7s, the 8s, the 9s, and the 10s, right? How easy is it to exploit the vulnerability? Again, that increases the score. How easy to remediate the vulnerability? Is there a patch? Or is it out in the wild right now and we're waiting for Microsoft to patch it? Okay. How confident the testing team is about the existence of the vulnerability? So there is sometimes a lot of conjecture. People will publish proof of concepts of the vulnerability. These are things that I watch and I learn about. But it's one of those things where sometimes, even though there's an exploit or vulnerability, it's very, very difficult to create or turn on. So it's one of those things where the testing team at NVD then applies this scoring method to it. Pardon me. So let's keep this simple, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this slide. We're at the 25-minute mark, so I want to kind of get into some of the AV stuff. But when you look at your business, and obviously we're all employed, whether we're consultants or what have you, look at your various businesses and start thinking about, you might want to take a screenshot, but this is where you start to think about risk, right? I'm no longer talking to you about solution sales. Do you need a SIM solution? What kind of AV? What kind of patching are you doing? Look at risk and then figure out where you fall in this area and then draw the baseline. Do you have some things are low risk, some things are high risk? Then you're somewhere in the middle probably, right? But if you're now medium to high, right, maybe you're on the higher end or maybe the medium end. So you can really kind of gauge how important your data is. For example, if you're working for anything in medical, your data is the most sought after. Whether you're a dentist office, whether you're, a clinic, whether you're a hospital, your data is the most sought after. So automatically you're getting into more higher risk situations. Okay. So again, I don't talk about security. I talk about risk, and we can figure out the security piece afterwards, but really understanding where the risk is. Okay. Now, this is called the Lockheed Martin Cyber Kill Chain. Now, this is 5 of about 7 steps, but these are the kind of the most, and I do recommend if you want to understand the whole life cycle of the Cyber Kill Chain, obviously go to Lockheed Martin Cyber Kill Chain, just Google that. You'll see some diagrams that kind of take you through the life cycle, but this is about delivery, exploitation, the installation, C2, command and control, by the way, that's what that means, C2, and actions. Right? Now, patch management falls there. That's one thing we can do to mitigate that. As soon as something gets delivered to our systems, whether our end user are clicking on a link, somebody has remotely executed a script, it's the exploitation, right? If we are patching our systems, we are right there heading off number 2 so that 3, 4, and 5 just do not happen. Hopefully all of that makes sense. And again, if you have any questions on this, feel free to use the chat interface. Now, the fun part. And I've been working in AV for at least 14 years. Okay, so I worked for another company here in Ottawa where I did antivirus troubleshooting as an L2 for them for many, many, many years. It was fun, often problematic. Because we were working with end users. And back in those days, we didn't have remote control. So everything was kind of, you tell me what you're seeing, I'll tell you where to click. So very different than it is today. But maybe you've heard of Carbon Black. Very, very good anti-malware vendor. SentinelOne just signed an agreement with Netflix, I think about 3 to 4 months ago. Trend Micro is based here in Ottawa as well. Fantastic offering. They are doing some very kind of what I call bleeding edge type stuff. Excellent company. I had some unfortunate things happen to them recently where they were caught, I believe, taking some information. I don't know many of the details, but they had a bit of blip in terms of their offering recently. I did put up Windows Defender. Now, I'll probably comment more on the Windows Defender part in a little bit as we go through kind of who to choose for your AV vendor. But I will tell you that, they are doing very, very well. Now, for those that know me, this is my favorite. Only because I've been using Bitdefender for probably the last 7 years. I love their offering. The ecosystem is very easy to use. And it's also, I'm just going to take a sip of a drink here. Very easy to use, but also very intuitive and easy to understand. So this is kind of my number one. And you know what? Just because I have a number one doesn't mean it's the right one. I mean, choosing the right vendor is very near and dear to any company. So by all means, we can have that discussion. Cylance. They are also doing some very cutting edge stuff. And when I say stuff, there's a lot of stuff going on. I'm going to really kind of take you through the life cycle of how AV is done And when I use AV or anti-malware, I'm using that really interchangeably. When people just still call them AVs, right? They're actually anti-malware engines now because it's now no longer just viruses and Trojans and worms, right? We're dealing with things like ransomware, grayware, spyware, a bunch of wares. So it's really just a general term called anti-malware, right? So the important part is that Cylance is really doing some very cool stuff. They're doing some very cool marketing as well. So I really want to kind of give them some kudos as well. Now, when we start understanding the cyber attack delivery, exploitation, installation, C2, command and control, that's where everything kind of happens. When there's a payload delivered to your system, what happens is it does reach out somewhere else, right? It wants to know that it's been installed, that it has remote access, that ransomware is delivered, that there's an encryption key. There's a lot of reasons why the C2 happens, right? And you can see at the very bottom that kind of that landscape from WAN to LAN to endpoint, WAN to LAN to endpoint, right? So it's doing stuff as it's traversing your local area network. It's going back out to the internet. So one thing I can tell you about anti-malware or AV is that it can stop delivery, exploitation, installation, and action. Now, there are very specific things you want to do at C2, right? Stringent firewall capability. You want to have network segmentation. For example, you want to keep IP phones away from desktop LAN, away from production servers or dev servers. You can use things like NIDS, SIM, OpenDNS, which is really a way to control whitelisting and blacklisting, and using things like web protection. What I can tell you is some AVs even actually have this, right? I would say they're not best fit at C2, but it's one of those things where it really, through the kind of the attack landscape here from 1 to 5, can really mitigate a lot of the internal risk, right? So that is why AV is so important, right? I think we all probably have some form of AV running on our systems today. I mentioned, 5, what I would call main players out there. Some of them are a little over-touted based on what they actually do. I spend a lot of time kind of researching who I think are the best ones, and I'm going to show you who those are. You can make your own determinations. But before I get into that, I really want to talk about AV and kind of the main buzzwords that are out there and really kind of breaking it down, right? AVs are doing things. Do you know how your AV works? Maybe not, right? So I'm going to kind of take you through how that really kind of works within any kind of AV or anti-malware. There are many AV and anti-malware vendors who claim they have AI or machine learning built into their software products. Is this a next-gen feature or really kind of cool marketing? I don't know, right? When you're talking about Cylance, if you go to their website, they're doing some really kind of cool, kind of cutting-edge stuff. But does it really work? I'm not really sure. Does crowdsourcing MD5, SHA, and known file types backed up with central manager qualify as machine learning? So that's typically what I see from most vendors out there. What they're doing is they're looking at patterns, applying checksum values to see if each bit looks like malware, and then from there it rolls up to the Bitdefender Cloud or Trend Micro, and it creates an intelligence which then comes back down to all of those different endpoints. Okay. Anyways, I'll leave it to you to decide which one is best for your organization, but at the very end, I'm going to kind of show you the proof in the pudding. Okay, so let's talk about pattern matching. I did touch on that one. A signature of the digital fingerprint of a piece of malware. So, for example, XYZ Trojan will have a digital pattern. Okay, it's a unique string of bits or a binary pattern representing the malware. Right, it's a very kind of complicated code. But it's, for when we get library files or definitions, updated to our AV, that's how it's able to find said malware, right? Each time a traditional AV product encounters a new file, the AV product looks through its signature list and asks, does this byte in this signature match this byte in this file? If it does, it moves on and checks the next byte. It continues through the whole file in this way, and if every byte of the file matches every byte in one of its signatures exactly, it flags it as malware. Now, caveat to this is if somebody changes a single bit within a malware, it's no longer going to be found by that one definition, right? So sometimes there are hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of definitions for pieces of malware. Okay, what is heuristics, or what is called heuristic analysis? Now, this is where, and simply put, it's basically running algorithms on your operating system, right, to really kind of get the underlying approach to what is happening, right? So the second approach is heuristics. The AV looks at loose properties of the file, such as how big the file is, whether it looks like it's using a set of dangerous functions, or whether it's using abnormal permissions. With heuristic approaches, the AV matches things that aren't in the code directly, right? Pardon me. One example of how this might work is by asking the following questions of the file. Does the executable import VirtualLock? Now, unless you're a hardware engineer, you're probably not even heard of VirtualLock. But basically, that's the process of software delivering information to memory, right? Is the executable greater than 30 kilobytes but less than 75? I forget why that's important, but it is an important one. Does the executable, that's basically where your scripted size comes in. Does the executable have a section whose permissions are read, write, and execute, right? So it can't be dangerous. If all of those things are true, then it's probably malware. Now, heuristics and behavioral analysis are kind of the same thing, but a little slightly different, right? Now, this is where we get into ransomware protection. Like if you don't have a module that has, like if your AV doesn't have behavioral analysis, it's not blocking anything, right? A third approach to behavior analysis, which is similar to heuristics and targets the actual behavior exhibited by malware. It wants to do something, but it stops it before. Behavior analysis looks at the questions such as, what is the file doing on a file system level? What is the file doing on a registry level? What is the file doing on a process level? What is the file doing on a network level? So based on all of these things, it looks at the behavior and then can shut it down, stop it before it actually does any damage. The trouble with this approach is that malware has to be run in the first place before the AV product can detect it. Now, we're talking about things happening in milliseconds. Typically, behavioral analysis is very good to prevent ransomware from encrypting entire sets of data on your system. So you might lose a file, but it's better than losing all of your documents, right? That's where ransomware comes in, or that's where behavioral analysis comes in. Hash matching, which is one of those underlying technologies that you just really don't hear about, but they all do it. So the fourth approach is hash matching. This is where it gets into MD5, SHA, and CRC32. MD5 and SHA are really kind of the two gold examples of hash matching software, but the AV calculates hashes over different parts of the file and does the following. It takes a hash over a certain area, right? So something like 124 bytes, and then through that can tell if it's malware. The only part where it gets more complicated in the real world is the fact that sometimes engines will make different hashes across the binary and see if any of them match, right? So it can take longer. You're getting into more computational stuff. That's why AVs typically use some AVs or CPU cycles. For instance, it may cut up the file into 124-bit chunks and take all of the hashes of them to see if any of them match a virus. Now, this one's kind of complicated. So unless you have a good understanding of what MD5 and SHA hashing is, it's kind of going to be a little bit over your head. But know that this is a function within AV. Now, there is an honest answer out there, right? And the reason why I wanted to put on this master class is because, like I said, patching and AV are really, really important to me. I know where, during that layered security approach, that AV really comes in, or where patching really comes in. And if I were to go back a few slides, there's a number of other routines that you should be doing to stop that attack vertical through the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain. It's not just AV. There's certain things you want to do outside of that. But if you're ever looking for honest answers on AV, they are out there. av-test.org is probably my favorite, and it's probably the single most trusted product tested source out there for AV. There is AV comparatives. It's very good deep analysis. They give a lot of great data on their product tests. PC Mag, as a guy who's spent probably over 20 years now, roughly 20 years in IT. PC Mag is one of my favorites because they talk about a whole breadth of stuff, but they also talk about AV, and they actually give really great product reviews on consumer-based AV. The two top ones are really designed, well, they do both consumer and business, but PC Mag is mostly focused on consumer AV, right? Now, who are the top AV vendors out there, right? So I presented SentinelOne. They just signed a really major deal with Netflix. Okay, great. Very hard to see any of their scoring online or any of their product tests online. There are some out there, but they're usually from end users who use them. So you got to take some of that with a bit of a grain of salt. But I have my own, and I've collected it directly from avtest.org, who I trust, and this is it. So here is the list of the top, I would say, 18 or 20 vendors, right? Now, that being said, if you look to the left-hand side, you've got the manufacturer, and then beside it, the product. Over to the right-hand side, you have score. So with avtest.org, they do a maximum score of 18 points. Okay, who is in that top 5? Bitdefender, Kaspersky, and believe it or not, Microsoft. I would have never thought, and this is the first time that Windows Defender has ever made, I would say even the top. It's never been kind of reputed as a very kind of solid solution. However, it is getting better and better all of the time. I would certainly trust Bitdefender over, for example, something like McAfee Endpoint Security. It did very well. It got 17 points, but lacked in some performance areas, right? So, and if you go throughout the list, Carbon Black, a really great tool, rated 6 for protection. Where is it? Carbon Black, 5.5 in performance, but only a 4 in usability. So it may be one of those ones that are kind of sitting on the tray icon on the endpoint, but yet the end user is really not understanding what it's doing, right? So there's a lot of different criteria that go into all of this, and all of this is broken down at av-test.org. So I do recommend you kind of heading through and taking, looking at your own results. But again, you won't see SentinelOne on here. You won't see a lot of different vendors on here because some of them don't submit their products for testing certificates. Now, when I talk about a layered security approach, and that's why I talk about Lockheed Martin, and I did a whole webinar on layered security, is that it's a very, very simple approach, right? You do things like use common sense, or you use behavioral blockers, which is what I would call behavioral analysis, connection blockers, things like firewalls, real-time protection, on-access scanning of the AV. Obviously the primary defense is going to be your anti-malware solution, but also patching your environment. And those 3 levels are hardware, operating system, application, right? So this is the common sense approach to layered security. And this kind of just breaks it down, because you do not want to be the guy putting his head down on the desk, laptop covered, as this guy is doing, and going, oh, wow, I've got ransomware. Well, we don't want to let that happen to our end users either, right? So some of the things we do, okay? Secure the perimeter, secure the web, secure the email, secure the wireless, right? These are just, again, common sense approaches to protecting the network, right? You've got wireless security, email security. Now, some of this is based in vendors, right? For example, if I want next generation firewall technology, I look to Cisco or I look to Meraki. If I'm looking to email security, we have 2 vendors we use. We've got a lot of turnkey solutions that we use internally to be able to protect our customers. Next gen endpoint protection. And again, I just put some generic information up here, but I'll leave it to you to determine what that is. When I want something next gen, I want something that's going to do all of those kind of 4 or 5 things that I listed out, from pattern matching to hash matching, behavioral analysis. I want it all. I want to make sure that my the customer's endpoint is protected. Secure the mobile device, protect the data. What are you using for backup? Secure your servers, right? Are they physical or are they virtual? What technologies are you using? So these, again, are topics of conversation. And again, at the end of any of this, if any of you have any questions, pardon me, here's where I can be contacted. And again, this isn't a sales pitch, even though I am a sales engineer. It's one of those things where if you do have any general questions about any products, anything you want to know, any deep dives, by all means. infosec@careworx.com is the distro that I look after for our security stuff. But also you can hit me up at jason.murphy@careworx.com, or even my colleague, our VCIO extraordinaire, his name's Jonathan.Lawless. He was on my previous masterclass, so I hope you found that one beneficial. Jonathan.Lawless@careworx.com. I really appreciate your time. Let me see if there's any questions in the chat. There doesn't appear to be. For all intents and purposes, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. If you have any questions on patch or AV, feel free to reach out. Thank you so much. Okay, bye-bye.